Chapter 1. Under the Veil of Silence. The trauma bay smelled like wet cotton and antiseptic. Elena Myers hadn't noticed that in years had stopped noticing most things. 3 straight night shifts did that. Time folded in on itself. Patients came and went in flashes of light and sobs and tubes. She moved on instinct now, like a bird, migrating by the tilt of the earth. At 3:47 a.m., her pager buzzed with urgency. Trauma Level 1, 82 minutes, VIP incoming, code black. No details. Just the cold language of protocol. She washed her hands slowly, though the adrenaline whispered otherwise. Across the ER, nurses repositioned gurneys, cleared hallways. Even in a place accustomed to chaos, the words code black meant something else. Media blackout. No records. No names. Someone important, broken in ways they couldn't afford to explain. Outside, sirens dissolved into the night. Through the automatic doors came a flurry of blue jackets and quiet voices. A tall man on the stretcher. Barefoot. Shirtless. Oxygen mask in place. Blood along the collarbone, staining the hospital sheet in a slow, symmetrical bloom. She stepped forward, gloved and composed. Vitals? BP dropping. No external bleeding, the paramedic said. Possible internal trauma. Car crash. Maybe. We didn't see the wreck. ID. He shook his head. No wallet. No phone. Just this. He handed her a black leather bracelet, snapped in two. There was a name etched inside. Travis King. She frowned. That name. It tugged something in her. Finance, politics, a donor, the rest didn't matter, not yet. Travis, she said gently, leaning in. His eyes were open. Blue. Sharp, not dazed. Like he was aware of everything but choosing silence. You're at Mercy General. You're safe. Can you hear me? He blinked once. No fear. No confusion. Just stillness. That was the first moment she knew something didn't match the chart. I'm 60. An hour later, after scans and lab work and whispered calls upstairs, the hospital's PR chief, Lauren Hunt, appeared beside Elena at the nurse's station. Her blazer was flawless, her smile tight. You'll be his attending. No chart access beyond you and Dr. Roy. No staff gossip. This case does not go beyond this floor. Who is he? Lauren hesitated. You didn't recognize him. Elena shook her head. Travis King, former CEO of Colburn Asset Group, worth nearly 9 figures, though no one's seen him since February. Rumors said he ran off to Greece. Or rehab. Or both. I thought he died. No, Lauren said coolly. Just disappeared. Elena looked back at the closed room door. He didn't crash his car, she said quietly. Lauren stiffened. Excuse me? He has contusions on both wrists. Classic restraint bruising. Clean break on the femur, too symmetrical for a crash. No airbag burns. No seatbelt mark. No glass in his hair. Lauren crossed her arms. Whatever theories you have, keep them to yourself. He's not just a patient. He's a crisis wrapped in privilege. Elena didn't answer. She didn't have to. She just walked back into the room. 1. He hadn't moved. His gaze rested on the ceiling tiles like they were constellations. The silence in the room was a thing unto itself, dense and listening. She sat in the chair beside his bed, unhurried. I'm Elena Myers, she said. I'll be the one checking your vitals, refilling your IV, and ignoring your Google search history. Still no reaction. I don't care if you're rich, she said. I care if you're breathing. She waited. Finally, his eyes turned to her. Just barely. But it was something. I think, she said slowly, that you weren't in a car accident. But I won't put it in your chart. Not unless you tell me to. He said nothing, but she saw at the slightest flinch, like a window cracking under pressure. Elena stood. Get some rest. I'll be back with tea. She paused at the door. I don't need you to explain anything. But if you're going to disappear again, I'd appreciate a note. 1. It wasn't until her shift ended, the sky beginning to blue just slightly, that she looked up Travis King's name. He had once been everywhere. CNN interviews. Gala speeches. Think tank panels. The man who called himself a futurist of value. He vanished without a trace 7 months ago. There had been speculation, but no facts. Until now. She closed the browser, rested her forehead against the steering wheel of her parked car, and exhaled. What kind of man walks into death so quietly? And what kind of woman recognizes it? The next night, the snow fell softly, just enough to hush the city. Elena sat in the staff lounge, cradling a paper cup of tea, its warmth seeping into her hands. Sleep had eluded her again. In the silence of her apartment, she'd rearranged books that didn't need moving, watered plants that had long since given up. Even the silence there felt judgmental. By the time she arrived at Mercy, the fluorescent lights already felt too bright. She changed into her scrubs slowly, mechanically, like an actress preparing for a role she no longer remembered how to play. In room 309, Travis was awake, propped slightly, staring at the window. Not out the window at it, as if he was studying the glass itself, not the world beyond. "I brought you something," Elena said. She placed the tea on his side table, chamomile with honey, the only herbal blend left in the lounge. He glanced at it. Then, slowly, his fingers moved toward the cup. Not to drink it, just to hold it. The steam curled between his hands like something sacred. "You haven't spoken," she said, not expecting a reply. "But the therapists think you're lucid. Cognitive scores are normal. Vital stable." He didn't blink. "So they think you're fine." A long pause. "But you're not, are you?" The monitor beeped softly. Outside the room, a gurney squeaked past. The world moved. He remained still. She sat in the visitor's chair again. Not across the room, closer now. There was something quietly magnetic about his stillness. Not apathetic. Not hostile. Just posed. "I know what it's like," she said. "To wake up and feel like the world's moving around you while you're pinned to the floor." Still nothing. "When my husband left," she continued, "I didn't tell anyone for weeks. We lived like strangers until the lease ran out. There was a pot of basil that wilted on our balcony. Neither of us watered it. Neither of us threw it out. That's what it was like dying in plain sight." She stood up abruptly. Why was she telling him this? He wasn't even... "Window," he said. Her breath caught. "I'm sorry?" she asked. He blinked slowly, then gestured a slight motion toward the window. "I saw. You there." Elena turned to look. The apartment building across the street, 7th floor. She followed the line of sight. That was her window. She turned back, stunned. "When?" "A pause. Months ago." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Something about the way he said it made it clear he'd been watching the world, looking for signs of life. And somehow, hers had surfaced. She sat again, gently. "You remembered it," she said. "That's how you drew it." He didn't answer. But she knew he had. "IU." Later, in the hallway, she passed Nurse Alma at the charting station. "Your silent patient's famous," Alma said, not unkindly. Someone dropped off flowers. No card. Elena gave a half smile. "Let me guess, white lilies." "Roses. Blue ones. Unnatural looking. Money," Elena thought. Always trying to dye things into beauty. She returned to room 309. The roses were already in a vase, perfuming the air with something sharp. Too much. She looked at Travis. "Friends?" He gave the faintest shrug. The room felt stifled now. "I'll move them," she said, lifting the vase and placing it on the windowsill. A beat passed. Then, almost like a whisper, "I don't want to be remembered that way." It was the second full sentence he had spoken. She turned to him, gently. "Then how do you want to be remembered?" He didn't answer. But for the first time, she saw something in his expression soften. A fracture in the ice, a hint of warmth in the hollow, and she realized something startling. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of surviving the wrong version of himself. At 2:06 a.m., When the ER had fallen into its quiet lull between midnight mayhem and morning chaos, she returned to her locker. Tucked inside was a piece of paper. Not folded. Not taped. Just resting there, deliberate. Ahwetch. Her, seated by the window, mug in hand, a threadbare blanket around her shoulders. Her hair down. Her eyes closed. It was unmistakably her. And yet drawn with such gentleness, such grace, it startled her. No harsh lines. Just charcoal and stillness and something resembling hope. She held the drawing to her chest for a long moment. Not because it was beautiful, but because someone had seen her, really seen her. When she walked back into his room, she found him asleep. Not the stiff, medicated doze of a trauma patient, but something quieter, real sleep. His breathing even. His hands unclenched. She set the sketch down by his bedside and added a note. I see you too. Chapter 2. The Man Who Refused to Speak. The following evening, the hospital was caught in that uneasy lull between shift changes. Machines hummed, trays clinked distantly. But Elena barely noticed. Room 309 had become its own orbit. And she moved around it like a moon drawn, silent, steady. Travis hadn't spoken again, but his presence, even in quiet, had grown heavier. As if every hour he remained in that bed without explanation or apology, he took root in the space around him. A nurse from Psych passed her a fresh file. Voluntary psychiatric. Hold 72 hours. Travis King's signature at the bottom. Not shaky. Not coerced. Calm and decisive. Elena, Dr. Roy said behind her. He was head of emergency psychiatry, soft-spoken, silver-haired, always smelled of coffee and clean paper. He signed it himself? He did. And hasn't spoken to me. Or to any therapist. Not even a symptom description. He's lucid. That's not the same as willing. She nodded. He interacts with you, Roy said. He responds. You may be the only bridge. She didn't reply. She wasn't sure if that made her flattered or responsible. I'll give him time, Roy said kindly. But if this is a media disaster waiting to happen, the board will want a statement. Even silence becomes a headline. Eventually, Elena looked through the narrow window into 309. Travis was sketching again, pencil strokes precise, rhythmic, his brow slightly furrowed, focused. Not on pain, on memory. Well, later, Elena entered his room without knocking. He didn't look up. You've been assigned a therapist. He'll check in tomorrow at 9. Travis drew a line across the page. I won't tell you what to say, she added. But silence can be loud, Travis. He paused, glancing at her, then handed her the sketch. It was the hospital cafeteria. Tables unevenly spaced. Plastic chairs. An old vending machine in the corner. And her profiled in black and white sitting alone, elbows on table, chin resting in one hand. Steam rising from a paper cup. You remember everything, she murmured. He didn't confirm. He didn't need to. The detail was impossible, unless he'd been watching her for longer than she knew. How long have you been in Chicago? He shook his head slowly. Not answering, or perhaps refusing. You watched me through my window. He nodded. And you followed me here? A longer pause. Then, another nod. She should have been alarmed. But strangely, she wasn't. Why me? Travis's pencil hovered above the page. Then he scribbled something quickly on the edge of the cafeteria sketch. She leaned in to read it. Because you didn't turn your lights off for weeks. Her breath caught. She remembered those nights, her apartment glowing deep into morning, a silent confession of insomnia and exhaustion. Grading Miss Student reports. Reading articles she didn't care about. Avoiding the sound of her own breath in an empty room. You watched my grief, she said quietly. Travis looked down. No. I watched you survive it. Alwar. Later that night, as rain smeared the windows and traffic lights blinked red over glistening streets, she sat alone in the stairwell behind the psych wing. Her tea had gone cold. Elena thought of the 2 embryos that never took, of the promises her body had made and broken, of the man who once whispered, We'll try again. Only to later whisper, I can't do this anymore. She had spent so long treating other people's wounds, she'd forgotten her own never closed. Only scarred. Footsteps on the stairs startled her. Travis stood 2 steps above. Hoodie zipped, hands in his pockets. How did you know I'd be here? She asked softly. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a scrap of charcoal-stained paper. A sketch. Of this stairwell. Her, in it. He handed it to her. On the back, a single line. You always find the quiet corners. Chapter 2. The Man Who Refused to Speak. The following evening, the hospital was caught in that uneasy lull between shift changes. Machines hummed, trays clinked distantly, but Elena barely noticed. Room 309 had become its own orbit, and she moved around it like a moon-drawn. Silent, steady. Travis hadn't spoken again, but his presence, even in quiet, had grown heavier. As if every hour he remained in that bed without explanation or apology, he took root in the space around him. A nurse from Psych passed her a fresh file. Voluntary psychiatric, hold 72 hours. Travis King's signature at the bottom. Not shaky. Not coerced. Calm and decisive. Elena. Doctor. Roy said behind her. He was head of emergency psychiatry, soft-spoken, silver-haired, always smelled of coffee and clean paper. He signed it himself? He did. And hasn't spoken to me. Or to any therapist. Not even a symptom description. He's lucid. That's not the same as willing. She nodded. He interacts with you, Roy said. He responds. You may be the only bridge. She didn't reply. She wasn't sure if that made her flattered or responsible. I'll give him time, Roy said kindly. But if this is a media disaster waiting to happen, the board will want a statement. Even silence becomes a headline. Eventually, Elena looked through the narrow window into 309. Travis was sketching again, pencil strokes precise, rhythmic. His brow slightly furrowed, focused, not on pain, on memory. Oh, den. Later, Elena entered his room without knocking. He didn't look up. You've been assigned a therapist. He'll check in tomorrow at 9. Travis drew a line across the page. I won't tell you what to say, she added. But silence can be loud, Travis. He paused, glancing at her, then handed her the sketch. It was the hospital cafeteria. Tables unevenly spaced. Plastic chairs. An old vending machine in the corner. And her profiled in black and white sitting alone, elbows on table, chin resting in one hand. Steam rising from a paper cup. You remember everything, she murmured. He didn't confirm. He didn't need to. The detail was impossible unless he'd been watching her for longer than she knew. How long have you been in Chicago? He shook his head slowly. Not answering, or perhaps refusing. You watched me through my window. He nodded. And you followed me here? A longer pause. Then, another nod. She should have been alarmed, but strangely, she wasn't. Why me? Travis's pencil hovered above the page. Then he scribbled something quickly on the edge of the cafeteria sketch. She leaned in to read it. Because you didn't turn your lights off for weeks. Her breath caught. She remembered those nights, her apartment glowing deep into morning. A silent confession of insomnia and exhaustion. Grading Miss Student reports. Reading articles she didn't care about. Avoiding the sound of her own breath in an empty room. You watched my grief, she said quietly. Travis looked down. No. I watched you survive it. Later that night, as rain smeared the windows and traffic lights blinked red over glistening streets, she sat alone in the stairwell behind the psych wing. Her tea had gone cold. Elena thought of the 2 embryos that never took, of the promises her body had made and broken, of the man who once whispered, We'll try again, only to later whisper, I can't do this anymore. She had spent so long treating other people's wounds, she'd forgotten her own, never closed. Only scarred. Footsteps on the stairs startled her. Travis stood 2 steps above. Hoodie zipped, hands in his pockets. How did you know I'd be here? She asked softly. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a scrap of charcoal-stained paper. A which? Of this stairwell, her, in it. He handed it to her. On the back, a single line. You always find the quiet corners. The stairwell had gone quiet again. The kind of quiet that felt earned, not awkward, but intimate. Elena sat back down on the cold concrete, holding the sketch in her lap. She traced the lines of the drawing, her own shoulders curled inward, a styrofoam cup between her hands. He'd even captured the way her hair fell forward on tired nights. Have you always drawn? She asked, her voice low. Travis remained on the steps above her, arms folded. For a moment, it seemed like he might slip back into silence. But then he nodded. Since I was a kid. I stopped after my mother died. A pause. Elena looked up. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? His face shifted. Not grief, just memory. She used to draw the world in fragments, he said. Corners of rooms. The curve of a teacup. Nothing whole. Just details. She told me that when you can't make sense of everything, you focus on one small thing and make it beautiful. Elena swallowed gently. And what about now? What do you focus on? Travis exhaled. The parts that hurt. She nodded slowly. That made sense. His drawings had edges to them, quiet sorrow wrapped in precision. They were beautiful. But in the way abandoned places were, ruins holding echoes. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Behind the stairwell's frosted glass window, a shape quick, retreating. Someone had been watching. I think we're becoming a story, Elena said dryly. Travis tilted his head. You already were one. She stood and brushed off her scrubs. If anyone asks, we were discussing hallway safety procedures. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Almost. She hesitated at the door. You said you saw me at my window. That you came here because the light was always on. He nodded once. And what if it turns off? A beat passed. His voice, low and even. Then I'll wait in the dark. Well, 2-5. The next morning, Elena found another drawing in her locker. This time, it was her hands, not her face, not her silhouette, just her hands, ungloved, holding a child's broken toy. She remembered the moment. A patient from a month ago, a boy whose mother had collapsed from an overdose. She had picked up the toy from the ER floor without realizing anyone was watching. She held the drawing to her chest again, not because it comforted her, but because it unnerved her in a way she welcomed. It meant she hadn't disappeared. Someone had seen her still being kind, even when she thought she had run out of warmth. At 9 o'clock a.m. Doctor. Roy returned to room 309 with a notebook and a soft voice. Travis greeted him with a nod. No words. Roy didn't push. Elena watched from just outside the glass. Travis didn't engage. But neither did he retreat. He flipped a pencil in his fingers, glanced occasionally at Roy's notes. At one point, he tapped the notebook and pointed at a line, then shook his head. Elena couldn't hear the exchange. But Roy looked thoughtful. And when he stepped out of the room 20 minutes later, he found her waiting. He's thinking, Roy said. More than I expected. Do you think he'll talk? He already is, Roy replied. Just not with his mouth. He tapped the notebook gently. Some people can't say things until they see them first. That's what drawing is for him, I think. A way to tell the truth sideways. Elena looked through the glass again. Travis was sketching something new. She could just make out the faint beginning of a scene, windows, silhouettes. A small figure curled on a bench. She already knew what it was. The night she'd slept in the family waiting room after getting the call that her second round of IVF had failed. It had been the end of her marriage, though no one had called it that at the time. The official reason was distance, but she knew it had been the moment when hope became too heavy to carry alone. She had cried until morning, her back against the vending machine, pretending to be asleep when the nurses walked past. How had he seen that? Unless he'd been here. Before. And that night, she brought 2 cups of tea instead of 1. She didn't say much. Just handed it to him, sat quietly. After a long silence, Travis spoke. I used to sit in the chapel. She turned her head. Here? He nodded. Middle of the night. When I couldn't sleep. When the market crashed. When my father's estate fell into probate. when my body stopped responding to food. I came here. Why this hospital? He shrugged. The name? Mercy. It sounded like it might forgive me. She let the silence stretch. Then he added, I didn't think I deserved help, but I wanted to sit near the place where it was offered. Elena blinked, her throat tight. Why now? She asked. Why come back? He looked at her, eyes clear. Because the last time I was here, you sat beside a girl in a wheelchair until her father arrived. 3 hours. You never looked at the clock once. She remembered that day. Vaguely. She was scared, Elena said. So I stayed. You weren't on duty. No, she replied. But she didn't know that. Travis nodded once. Exactly. And just like that, they sat together. Two strangers, no longer strangers. The man who refused to speak, and the woman who had never truly been heard. Chapter 3. The Drawings. Elena had never liked Sundays at the hospital. They were too quiet, too sterile. The hum of urgency dimmed. It was the kind of silence that reminded her of old waiting rooms and unanswered prayers. That morning, she found another sketch waiting for her, this time in her mailbox. Folded neatly between discharge reports. It wasn't of her. It was of him. Or rather, a version of him she hadn't seen before. Travis, sitting in the hospital chapel's back pew, arms folded, head bowed, not in prayer, but in stillness. The stained glass windows above him glowed in charcoal hues. Even on paper, he looked like a man on the edge of something vast and unknowable. On the bottom corner, 2 words were written in fine pencil. Before the fall. Elena traced the curve of his shoulder with her thumb. It was the first time he'd offered her a drawing of himself, and she wondered what it cost him. Mike. Room 309 had become a quiet sanctuary. The staff had grown used to it now, used to Travis's silence, his precision, the way he made space around himself without ever asking. No one disturbed him, and when Elena entered, no one questioned why. He was sketching again. This time, with ink, the page showed a storefront. Nothing remarkable, just a little corner bookstore with faded awnings and a flickering neon sign, still and page. A black cat in the window. A boy with a stack of books, barely taller than him. Elena stepped closer. This was real? He nodded. My mother's shop. Chicago, 1989. She smiled. That sign. That font. It's terrible. He chuckled softly. It startled her. A real laugh, not loud, but genuine. His eyes met hers, and the shared amusement lingered. She loved old things, he said. Even the fonts. Especially the fonts. Elena sat beside his bed, facing the drawing. She sounds kind. She was the only person who ever told me it was okay to fail. She looked at him carefully. And then you became the man who couldn't afford to. His jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he flipped to a blank page and started sketching again. Slow, thoughtful strokes. Do you still draw her? Elena asked. He paused. Only her hands. A silence settled between them. Familiar now. Not uncomfortable like weather between two people who've learned to live in the same storm. Indare. That evening, as the rain came down in gentle waves, Elena returned to her office and found something pinned to her door. Another drawing. But this one was different. Not of her. Not of him. It was a scene fictional. Maybe a woman and a man standing in a hospital corridor, both barefoot, her in a long gown, him in a wrinkled suit. They were laughing, heads tilted back. The walls around them blurred, as if the hospital had faded into fog. It was soft, warm, unreal. She turned it over. A note was scribbled in the margin. Haven't drawn the future in a while. Which from one. She brought tea that night. No words. Just 2 mugs. Chamomile and mint. Travis looked at her with something unreadable like gratitude mixed with fear. What are we doing? She asked suddenly. He blinked. I mean this, she continued. These drawings. These late nights. These silences that mean more than conversations. He set his pencil down. Saturday up straighter. I don't know, he said. but I'm not pretending. Neither was she, and that terrified her. Oh. At midnight, Elena couldn't sleep. Her apartment felt too still, the ticking clock too loud, the couch too soft. She wandered into the kitchen and made a cup of tea, holding it in both hands the way she always did. On the windowsill, there was a small envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a sketch of her standing in that very window, tea in hand, city behind her. It was dated that morning. On the back, I still see the light. By the following night, room 309 had shifted in tone. It was no longer just a hospital room. It felt lived in, subtly reshaped by the rhythm of two people who no longer pretended to be strangers. The flowers had been moved to the floor. The fluorescent light had been dimmed by a napkin draped over the wall sconce. Elena had left a small radio by his bed tuned to the classical station that played late-night cello suites and soft jazz. Travis drew with the radio on now. Tonight, it played something mournful, a melody that seemed to breathe. "I used to think I'd die in a hotel suite," he said quietly, eyes on his sketch pad. Surrounded by stock reports, unfinished contracts, liquor bottles I didn't remember opening. Elena leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's awfully romantic." He gave her a sidelong glance. It was pathetic, but it felt deserved. She stepped closer, folding her arms tighter. "You wanted to be punished. I wanted to vanish." There it was, his confession, not loud, not showy, just placed into the air like one of his drawings, vulnerable and precise. Elena didn't flinch. "I've thought about vanishing too," she said, voice steady. "Not dying, just being somewhere no one expected me to function. No charts, no pity, just silence and sky." He looked at her then fully. "No performance, no veil. I think that's why I found you," he said. "You were already halfway gone." Elena exhaled. "And you were already on your way back." 1. In the days that followed, Travis began drawing faster, as if something inside him had opened. He left them for her in unexpected places. One appeared inside her locker, a sketch of her stethoscope, twisted into the shape of a question mark. Another was slipped into her coat pocket. A drawing of her hands fixing a child's fore. Her concentration rendered in such tender detail it nearly undid her. One was found in the cafeteria napkin holder. Her and Travis seated across from each other. The table empty, but the space between them full of light. Each one said what they wouldn't. Each one felt like a heartbeat. 2. Then came the one that startled her most. A drawing of himself. In the bathtub. Naked shoulders. Scarred wrists. The water was inked in deep blacks, his face turned away. But the detail was unmistakable. It was not fiction. It was memory. He had drawn his own death, not the act, but the moment just before. Elena stared at it for a long time, seated in her office with the door locked. It was the most intimate thing he'd ever given her. And it was a cry. That night, she didn't bring tea. She brought herself. She stepped into room 309 without knocking, without a chart, without protocol. And looked up. She held out the drawing. "You wanted me to see this?" He nodded once. She sat beside him, folding the paper gently. "I did too," she whispered. He frowned. "What?" "Once, years ago, after the second failed embryo, I swallowed 6 sleeping pills with wine. Not enough to end me, just enough to forget for a while." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I woke up with my shoes still on, and the only thing I remember was this thought. Even now, I still want someone to find me." Travis didn't speak. He just reached for her hand, and for the first time, they touched. And, at 3:18 a.m. Elena walked the quiet hallway outside the psych wing. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lauren Hunt, the hospital's PR chief, speaking urgently on her phone in the shadows, gesturing toward Travis's room. A sinking feeling filled Elena's chest. Somewhere, beyond the intimacy and drawings and nights full of silence, someone was watching, and someone was planning to speak. Chapter 4. The Gala and the Corridor. The invitation came in a white envelope slipped under her office door. No sender, no note. Just elegant script on cream cardstock. Annual Mercy Benefit Gala. Septini. 30 p.m. Observation Deck Ballroom. Dress code, formal. Attendance strongly encouraged. Elena sighed. The hospital PR team had never been subtle. Down the hallway, she could hear laughter nurses joking at the charting station, the occasional rolling cart squealing. Everything felt too loud. She stood by her window, staring at the city skyline as the last of the late winter light slipped behind brick towers. She hadn't worn a gown since her sister's wedding. That night had been full of forced smiles and side glances from relatives who knew about the divorce but said nothing. She almost threw the invitation away. But then she thought of Travis. The night of the gala arrived with icy wind that rushed off the lake and slapped the windows of the top floor. Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror in a black velvet dress she hadn't touched in years. The seams were tighter. Her hair was looser, but she didn't look like a stranger. She looked like someone surviving. She arrived at the hospital's top floor just after 7:45. The ballroom, normally used for high-level donor events, had been transformed with strings of amber light and soft jazz echoing from a small quartet near the stage. Doctors, board members, local politicians, all dressed in black and navy, milled about, sipping champagne, laughing too loudly. Elena hovered by the far wall, a glass of water in hand, her name badge tucked discreetly into her coat pocket. She scanned the room out of habit. And then she saw him. Travis King, in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, collar open, no tie. His hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. It looked, well, startlingly so, and he looked right at her. Their eyes met across a room full of glass and pretense. He began to walk toward her. "And you clean up," she said, trying not to smile. "So do you." They stood side by side, out of the way of the noise and chatter. "I didn't think you'd be here," she said. "I wasn't planning to be," Lauren insisted. "She's good at insisting." He glanced around. Most of these people would trade their children for a tax deduction. It's like a safari of high-functioning dysfunction. That made her laugh, unexpectedly. She covered her mouth. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. He watched her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You laugh like you forgot you could," he said. She looked away. "It's been a year." "Since?" "Since anyone stayed." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He didn't ask questions. He didn't prod. Instead, he held out his hand. "Dance with me." She blinked. "There's no dance floor." "We'll make one." And they slipped out of the ballroom like two teenagers sneaking away from a prom. Down the back staircase, past the radiology department, into the long, polished hallway outside the locked surgical suites. It was silent, dim, echoing. Travis pulled a phone from his pocket, opened a music app. A slow, vintage tune began to play strings, piano, a voice from the 1942nd drifting through the corridor. He offered his hand again. This time, she took it. Barefoot, shoes dangling from her free hand, she stepped into his arms. They danced slowly, tentatively, as if remembering how. She rested her head against his chest. The music crackled. "I don't think I've touched anyone in 6 months," she whispered. He tightened his hold slightly. "Then, let this count for 6. They danced until the song ended. And then again. The hospital faded. The past quieted. It was just skin, and shadow, and something wordless opening between them. Then she pulled back, teasing. "You're not bad at this." "I was engaged once," he said. "A long time ago. She made me take lessons." "Did she make you learn how to disappear too?" It came out too quickly. Too sharp. Travis stiffened. Their rhythm broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean." He reached for her hand again. Gently. No anger. "I did disappear," he said. "And not just from you." He turned slightly, as if to walk, then paused. "She left before I fell. I don't blame her. I was already gone." Elena looked down. "And now?" Now, he said, I'm still deciding whether I want to stay. They didn't kiss. But something passed between them in that hallway stronger than lips, louder than vows. Recognition. Two people circling the same wound, and daring, just slightly, to believe it could heal. The hallway was quiet again. Travis walked her back slowly, no words, just their footsteps echoing across the tile, the low hum of vents, the distant clatter of trays from the overnight shift. The music had stopped. The corridor had returned to being what it was, just a hallway. But something had stayed behind. When they reached the elevator, they hesitated. Neither wanted to push the button. You could come back upstairs, Elena said softly. To the donors and dignitaries? To the terrible champagne. He gave her a half smile. Tempting. They stood like that close but not touching. She could smell the faint citrus of his cologne, the starch of his jacket sleeve. Their bodies no longer carried the chill of strangers. Good night, Elena, he said finally. She tilted her head. Are you always so formal after midnight dances? He held her gaze. Only when I'm afraid I'll remember it too clearly. She stepped in. Briefly. Her hand against his chest, the thud of his heart beneath. Then let it be clear, she whispered. We were there. We laughed. We were alive. And then she left, turning before she changed her mind. The next morning, Elena arrived at work earlier than usual. There was a drawing pinned to her locker. This time, no words. No date. Just the corridor. The two of them dancing in shadow, her head on his shoulder, his hand at her back, light pouring in through the far window like a benediction. She smiled, touching the paper gently. He was still here. She made tea. But when she arrived at room 309, the bed was empty. No patient. No sketchbook. No Travis. The room had been stripped blank linens, IV stand rolled aside, fresh disinfectant scent clinging to the floor tiles. Only a single paper cup remained by the window, the tea long gone cold. Elena stood still, stund. She walked briskly to the nurse's station. Where's the patient from 309? The charge nurse blinked. Discharged. Early this morning. Who authorized it? Doctor. Roy signed off. He said it was voluntary. King requested it himself. Elena stepped back. Voluntary. He had chosen to leave. No noche. No goodbye. Nothing. The corridors felt longer than before. The fluorescent lights too harsh. The tea in her hand, suddenly unbearable. In the cafeteria, she sat in the corner booth by the vending machines, the one she'd once cried in after the fertility call. Her fingers clenched the paper cup, but she didn't sip. She wanted to be angry. But anger required the illusion of control, and she had never had any when it came to him. He had always been choosing when to stay, and when to vanish, and, by noon, the whispers had started. Someone had leaked the name. Travis King seen, leaving psych wing in tux. Billionaire mental health mystery deepens. Donor or dangerous? The articles circulated internally. One even reached her inbox, forwarded anonymously. The gossip came wrapped in questions. Was he really suicidal? Why was he dancing with staff? Why was Elena Myers spending off hours with him? Elena sat in her office and stared at her wall of diplomas. They didn't feel like armor anymore. They felt like decoration over a crack. 2. At 5:00 p.m., she was summoned to the administrative floor. Lauren Hunt greeted her with a tight smile. Elena. Sit down. She did. There's been concern. Several media outlets are implying inappropriate boundaries. There was a leak. And, I'm afraid, your name has come up more than once. I didn't leak anything, Elena said firmly. Lauren folded her hands. I'm not accusing you. But perception is everything. Especially when a high-profile figure is involved. Are you suspending me? Lauren Sahil. Pending review. Elena stared at her. Based on what? The optics. That's enough. Her chest rose slowly. She wouldn't give Lauren the dignity of watching her break. I treated him with dignity. Something you may not be familiar with. Lauren's expression didn't change. You're off rotation effective immediately. HR will reach out. And just like that, it was over. The drawings, the quiet, the corridor. She walked out of the office carrying only her coat. As the door closed behind her, she whispered the only thing that felt true. You left again. Chapter 5. Gone without goodbye. Snow returned to Chicago with a kind of reluctant grace. Not the harsh, biting storm of winter's peak, but a slow, swirling hush. By the time Elena stepped off the hospital steps, the sidewalk was already dusted, muffling her footsteps like someone had turned the world's volume down. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried the day the embryos failed, nor the day her husband moved out, nor the day she'd accidentally burned the box of baby clothes she'd hidden in the closet. But that evening, as the wind curved around her and the streetlights flickered through the snowfall, she wished someone would look at her and know, not ask, not pity, just know. No. Her apartment smelled like old tea and dust. The basil plant on the windowsill had dried out again, brittle leaves curling inward. She tossed her bag to the floor and shed her coat, letting it collapse across the arm of the chair. She stared at her reflection in the living room window. The same face. But the eyes were changed, she could see it now. Something had opened there. Something unclosable. And now it ached. She sat on the couch and unfolded the sketch Travis had left the one from the corridor. She studied the curve of her own body in his lines, the shadowed laugh tilted toward him. The space between them hadn't been drawn in. It had just been white, empty, possible. And now he was gone. Not missing. Gone. By choice. She should have expected it. Should have prepared for the pattern. Appearance, intimacy, retreat. But knowing didn't soften the blow. It only made the silence louder. Mike and Ben. 3 days passed. No messages. No noci. No drawing. Only headlines. Where is Travis King now? Mental breakdown or strategic disappearance? The rise and vanishing of a titan. His name buzzed in Elena's inbox, radio static in the hospital corridors. People speculated. Some mocked. A few defended. No one asked her. That, somehow, was worse. And, on the 4th day, she was called to HR. 2 men in grey suits. One polite woman with kind eyes who didn't meet hers. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. A report had been filed. Someone had seen them together in the stairwell, another near the psych wing. A few whispered that he was her patient. Others hinted that he wasn't, but that she wanted him to be. No proof. Only concern. And in an institution more worried about appearance than healing, concern was enough. Elena, we're placing you on indefinite leave, they said. We understand this is difficult. We just need time to clarify the chain of events. Words, polished and polite, like stones being handed to her, one after another, until she was carrying their weight alone. She nodded, once. Didn't argue. Didn't beg. She just left. Outside, the world moved without her. Traffic churned, dogs barked. Someone argued over a parking ticket. Elena stood at the crosswalk, holding her keys like they meant something. But she wasn't sure where to go. The hospital had been her compass. Not just her job, but her rhythm, her identity. The place she went to outrun the echo of empty rooms and holiday dinner tables with one chair too many. Now it was gone. And so was he. She walked. No destination. Just movement. Until she found herself on a quiet street near the lake, where the wind softened and the old trees leaned in like they knew how to listen. She sat on a bench, gloved hands curled together, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to whisper the thing she hadn't said aloud. I want to be seen. Not just useful. Seen. Well. That night, she returned home and opened the box of sketches. She laid them all out on the floor like pages of a life not fully lived. Hands. Corridors. Cafeteria windows. The bookstore. Her breath catching. Her hands fixing IV lines. Her laugh, ghost-like in graphite, and in every single one space, blank space, intentionally left white, unfinished, room for what had not yet happened, room for what still might. but only if he came back. The snow kept falling. A quiet, persistent hush that covered the city in a kind of reverence. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't beg attention. It simply blanketed everything: rooftops, windshields, thoughts. Elena stayed indoors. The couch became her island. Her days were marked not by patient rounds or shift charts, but by mugs of tea cooling beside unread books, half-checked emails, unanswered voicemails from her sister. She thought often of that first night in room 309. How still he had been. How quickly she'd recognized it. Not pain, not confusion. Resignation. Now, she was the one learning how to be still. And, on the 6th morning, she received a text from an unknown number. No introduction. No greeting. Just a link. NBC Chicago. Live at noon. The Fall and Rise of Travis King. Elena's heart stuttered. She clicked the link. A countdown ticked in the corner of the screen. 45 minutes. She stared at it. Then stood. Then sat. Then stood again. The broadcast opened with aerial shots of the hospital. Of him being wheeled out days ago, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Tabloid voices narrated over it, speculating on medications, motives, mental breakdowns. Then the camera cut to a studio, and there he was. Travis, wearing a gray sweater, no tie, no jacket. His hair slightly longer. His expression not polished but real steady, serious. The anchor gave the preamble. And then, "Mr. King, why now? Why speak at all?" Travis looked directly into the camera. "I'm speaking because silence protects shame. And shame is the cage too many of us live in." Elena leaned forward, fingers clutched around her tea mug. "I didn't have a car accident," he continued. "I tried to take my own life." The anchor shifted in her seat. Travis didn't flinch. "I wasn't drunk. I wasn't on a bridge. I was in a hotel tub, believing the world was better off without me." The studio was silent. "I had everything: money, power, the illusion of control. But I had no peace. No rest. No sense of being worth saving." Elena felt something release in her chest. "But someone did save me," he said. "Not with heroics. With humanity." Her breath caught. "A doctor," he said, voice softening. "Who brought me tea? Who didn't ask for my resume? Who didn't look away from the scars? Who sat with me when I had nothing left to offer?" The anchor glanced at her notes. "Dr. Elena Myers?" Travis nodded. "She treated me like I wasn't a crisis. She treated me like a person." The screen showed photos blurry. Grainy Elena walking down the hospital corridor. Elena laughing near a nurse's station. She winced. Lauren had leaked these, no doubt. "She's now been placed on leave," Travis said, "because she sat with a man who needed someone." He turned to the camera again. "If that's misconduct, maybe the system needs reevaluation." Elena stood frozen in her living room. He was defending her. Nationally. With nothing to gain. "I want the world to know," he said, "that healing doesn't happen in headlines. It happens when someone looks at you and stays." To Ido. After the broadcast, Elena sat for a long time in silence. The tea had gone cold again, but her hands were warm. She picked up the drawing of the hospital corridor, the one where they danced, folded it slowly, then whispered aloud, "You stayed." Chapter 6. The Anonymous Donor. When Elena returned to Mercy General, the air felt different. Not sweeter. Not simpler. But possible. She wore her plainest coat, left her hair down, and carried no illusions. She didn't expect applause or apologies. She expected, at best, silence. At worst, the polite kind of distancing reserved for complicated figures. But the moment she stepped through the glass doors, something strange happened. People looked up and nodded. Not in scandal. Not in pity. In recognition. As if, somehow, her private ache had become communal, like a wound everyone now shared a little differently. At the elevator, a nurse she barely knew reached out and squeezed her hand. No words, just a soft press of fingers. Elena said thank you without speaking. There. Upstairs, her old office door was still locked, sealed with administrative tape and procedure. But just down the hall, a new placard had been mounted outside one of the smaller conference rooms. Community Mental Health Wing, Staff Planning Suite. Sponsored by the Evelyn King Foundation. Elena froze. Evelyn. That was his mother's name. A folded brochure sat on a nearby table. She opened it. A private gift has made possible a new initiative in community trauma support, patient dignity advocacy, and art-based recovery for adults in crisis. In the margins, a sketch. Black ink. Clean lines. A cafeteria. 2 chairs. 1 empty. 1 occupied. A hand reaching across the table. Beneath it, some wounds aren't meant to be erased. Just understood. TK. Elena exhaled. He was back. Not as a patient. As a presence. And he'd returned not to reclaim his past, but to build something that could outlive it. Later that afternoon, she sat in the new planning suite, sipping coffee with Dr. Roy. He never told me, Roy said, eyes smiling behind tired glasses. The foundation just appeared. With very specific funding instructions, Elena glanced through the window. Volunteers were assembling new chairs in the patient lounge. Someone was mounting framed prints Travis's drawings. Real, delicate, not curated, just true. Why me? She asked quietly. Roy looked at her for a long time. Because you never looked away. Not from him. Not from anyone. She nodded slowly, unsure what to do with that kind of clarity. And before she left for the day, she walked the long hallway between wings, the one where she and Travis had danced under amber light and invisible music. At the far end, the wall had been painted a soft gray-blue. A single drawing had been mounted there. Not in a frame, just tacked up with 2 brass pins. It was the corridor again. But this time, they were facing each other. Hands held. No space left between them. And in the corner, the date of that night. No title. No signature. Just that memory, made permanent. Elena lingered before the drawing longer than she meant to. It wasn't just the image that stopped her, it was the way he had captured something invisible. The lean of her shoulders toward him, the quiet tension in his hands, a closeness that hadn't yet become touch, but was already speaking louder than words. A corridor. A heartbeat. A choice. And somehow, he had made it art. She reached out and touched the paper's edge lightly, her fingers brushing the tape. It wasn't about beauty. It was about memory, his memory of her, and hers of him. They were different. Yes, but both painfully clear, and maybe that was enough. We're. That night, she stood alone in the cafeteria. The evening shift had already begun, and most of the tables were empty. Trays stacked neatly, floors mopped to a shine. The vending machines still hummed, as indifferent as ever. She sat in the booth near the window, their booth, though it had never really belonged to them. Outside, the snow was thinning. You could see the concrete beneath now, wet and honest. She sipped her tea, lukewarm. The hospital moved around her, but she sat still, as if waiting for something she couldn't name. And then, mind if I sit here? His voice. Familiar. Soft. As if he knew he was interrupting something fragile. She looked up. Travis stood there. No tux. No patient bracelet. Just a dark sweater and a calm face. Older, maybe. Steadier. His sketchbook under one arm. Elena nodded, barely trusting her voice. He sat across from her. No ceremony. Just presence. You came back, she said. I never left, he replied. She raised an eyebrow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a hospital note, aged around the edges. I left this, he said, tucked into your locker the morning I left. She unfolded it. It was a drawing of the basil plant on her windowsill. Alive. Vibrant. And beneath it, in pencil. I'm not vanishing. I'm planting. She stared at it, throat tight. I didn't find it. I figured you didn't. But I wasn't ready to come back yet. He placed a cup on the table, her favorite tea. Still steaming. I needed to stand before I could walk toward anything. Especially you. Elena didn't move. "You defended me," she said. "You didn't have to." "I did. Because I lost everything once by staying silent. I won't do it again." She looked down. The cafeteria lights reflected in her tea like stars in water. "What do you want from me, Travis?" He leaned forward. "I want what we started in silence," he said. But this time, with words. "I." A long pause. Then she smiled, soft and sad. "But real. I brought the basil back to life," she said. He grinned. "I know." She looked at him, surprised. "I may have walked past your building once or twice," he admitted, "just to see if the light was still on." Elena laughed quietly. "Still watching me?" He shook his head. "Not watching anymore. Looking. There's a difference." He reached for her hand across the table. And this time, she didn't pull away. Chapter 7. The Leak. The peace didn't last. It never does. Not in places built on reputations and silence. 2 weeks after Travis's return, after the quiet cups of tea in the cafeteria, the slow rebuilding of trust, the calm before something like closeness Mercy General exploded, not in smoke or sirens, but in pixels. An email, forwarded, then leaked. Subject: Confidential Psychiatric Evaluation. T. King. Attachment: PDF. 4 pages. Elena saw it at 7:12 a.m. Just as she was walking into the staff lounge, her phone vibrated once, then again, then erupted with a flood of messages, some sympathetic, others sharp. The file had details that only a select few had access to. His mental state, his attempt, dates, medications, her name, not in the diagnosis, not directly, but mentioned in a footnote. Patient responds best to Dr. Elena Myers. Notes indicate emotional connection is influencing participation. That was all it took. By the time she reached the psych wing, the boardroom was already full. Travis was nowhere in sight. I-1. Lauren Hunt stood at the head of the long conference table, a printout of the leaked email fanned in front of her like a deck of cards. Her voice was clipped. Practiced. "We have a media storm brewing. National outlets are picking it up. The perception is that confidential records were mishandled. And someone in this building leaked it." Elena didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every eye in the room had turned to her already. "Doctor." Roy cleared his throat. With respect, the file came from a private server. Only 4 people had access. Lauren didn't blink. "And 2 of them are in this room." "I didn't leak it," Elena said, voice calm but clear. "Then who did?" Lauren asked, as if the absence of guilt was itself suspicious. Elena turned to Roy. "You know me." "I do," he said gently, but the doubt in the room had already taken root. Doubt didn't need proof, it only needed space. "Until further notice," Lauren said, "we're requesting that Dr. Myers step down from all patient-facing duties." It wasn't a suspension. Not this time. It was exile, wrapped in procedure. When she walked the halls like a ghost, colleagues offered kind looks, but not words. No one wanted to choose sides, not when the air smelled like fallout. At her locker, she found the latest sketch. It had been taped up carefully, in the spot where her nameplate used to be. A hospital corridor, empty this time, a single figure standing in the middle. No face, no name, just waiting. And beneath it, one line: "I'm not going to let them erase you." Her fingers trembled as she touched it, but she did not cry. Of Lee. That night, she sat at her apartment window again, the tea untouched beside her. She stared across the city, wondering if he was out there too, if he was drawing, if he was fighting, if he was about to speak again, not to her, but to everyone, because the only way to take back a story was to tell it louder. Elena spent the next morning in the quietest corner of Mercy General, the art therapy room in the new community wing. It hadn't opened yet. The walls were bare, the shelves only half filled with supplies, but it smelled faintly of graphite and new beginnings. She sat in the corner chair, holding the sketch Travis had left in her locker. The figure alone in the corridor. No name. No door. Just waiting. She knew that space. She had lived in it long before this scandal. But knowing didn't make it easier. End quote. Around noon, the door opened. She looked up, expecting an administrator. Or maybe Roy. But it was him. Travis. He didn't knock. Didn't hesitate. He just stepped in, closed the door behind him, and leaned against it as if he were holding back the entire outside world with his spine. "They're trying to bury you," he said softly. She nodded. "I know. They think silence keeps everything neat. They're not wrong." He stepped forward slowly. The light from the tall windows caught the tension in his jaw. "I didn't come back to be a symbol, Elena. I came back to give something back. And instead, I dragged you into the fire." "You didn't drag me," she said. "I walked." He crouched in front of her then, the way someone kneels before a confession not to worship, but to be honest, "I didn't know how to thank you," he whispered. "Not properly. You gave me back my breath, my name, my place. And when I disappeared, it wasn't about you. It was about whether I deserved to stay." She reached for his hand without thinking. He took it, held it, anchored himself in it. "I want to say something," he said, "publicly. Not a press release. Not some media-friendly apology. Just truth. All of it." She blinked. "You'd go on record?" "I will not let them turn you into a cautionary tale. You don't owe me that." "Yes," he said firmly, "I do." She looked at him, really looked at the man who had once drawn only in corners and silence. Now, he was facing the storm, and choosing them. 0. That evening, Travis held a press conference on the front steps of Mercy General. No teleprompter. No legal notes. Just a microphone, a small crowd, and the cold wind rising around him. Elena watched from her apartment, the television volume low. "I am the one who asked Dr. Myers to sit with me during my psychiatric hold," he began, "not because she was assigned to me, because she was the first person who looked at me like I was still in the room." He paused, letting the silence hold him. "She didn't break any rules. She broke a pattern, one I had built for myself, one where I hid behind wealth and fell apart quietly. She saw me. She stayed. And if that's what we punish now, maybe the system isn't about healing anymore." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. "And for the record," he added, his voice steady, "if she hadn't stayed, I wouldn't be here. And neither would the donations that followed. Or the new community wing. Or the beds being filled by people who, for the first time, are being treated like more than a billing code." He looked straight at the camera. "I'm not ashamed of my story. I'm ashamed it took this long to tell." Elena's chest ached with something she hadn't felt in months. Pride. Not in him. With him. Nay. That night, a courier knocked on her door. A plain envelope. Inside, a drawing. The two of them sitting at the cafeteria table this time, facing each other, and between them, no teacups. Just their joined hands. Underneath it, "This time, I stayed." Chapter 8. Live at 7. The story had changed. Not overnight, not completely, but the tone shifted. Where once headlines whispered scandal, now they carried something closer to grace. Former hedge fund CEO becomes mental health advocate after attempted suicide. Travis King donates $20. Million to build dignity-focused recovery wing. Doctor suspended for Compassion gains national support. Elena read none of them. Instead, she walked. She wandered through Lincoln Park in the early morning fog, the radio in her pocket tuned to a public station that played old jazz and quiet interviews. She needed the world to slow down, even as it spun faster around her. Everyone wanted something now. Appearances. Statements. Opportunities. But all she wanted was to know what came next. In quote. At 6:58 p.m., she stood in her living room, tea in hand, heart fluttering. She hadn't turned on the television, but the station was already live. Travis sat in a studio with soft lighting and a glass table between him and a quiet, aging journalist who looked more like a philosopher than a pundit. The lower third banner read, "Travis King. Live on mental health, loss, and beginning again. The anchor's first question came gently. What made you decide to speak out, Mr. King? Travis looked straight ahead, not at the anchor, not at the camera. Past them. Because silence is where I almost died. The studio stilled. I built a life of noise, he said. Money. Travel. Acquisitions. But the silence that followed when all of that crumbled, that's where the real danger lived. That's when I started to believe I didn't matter. That I had outlived my usefulness. Elena sat down slowly, her tea untouched. I stayed in luxury hotels and couldn't sleep. I read financial forecasts like they were holy texts, hoping for absolution. I watched a woman in her window across the street from me, night after night, lights never off. His voice cracked just slightly. She was always there. Drinking tea. Reading. Existing. The anchor tilted his head. Did you know her? I do now. He smiled. The smallest, most honest curve of his lips. She became my compass back to the world. Oh. They played clips from the hospital's new mental health wing patients, walking calmly through the halls, framed sketches on the walls, volunteers handing out warm meals in the community lounge. No voice-over. Just piano over movement. Human lives unfolding without spectacle. Then the anchor turned the conversation. There was controversy about your relationship with Dr. Elena Myers. There was misunderstanding, Travis said gently. What she offered wasn't unprofessional. It was human. And that's what frightened the system most. He leaned forward. We treat mental illness with protocols, but healing doesn't come from charts. It comes from kindness. From someone sitting beside you and refusing to look away. Elena's eyes stung. She took a slow breath. 1. Near the end of the interview, the anchor asked, "What would you say now to the version of yourself from a year ago?" Travis didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Stay. She's coming. You just don't know it yet." The screen faded to black. Elena sat in the hush that followed, the kind that comes after something true has been spoken aloud for the first time. Then she whispered to the empty room. I came. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Not from fear, or grief, or even anger, but something deeper. Recognition. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching the city lights pulse beyond her curtains, and realized she was no longer waiting for someone to tell her what came next. She was becoming it. Her phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A message from Travis. Turn on the radio. Station 90. Joe. She clicked it on. Static. Then a familiar voice, tired, warm, real. Travis. He was being interviewed again, this time by a public station host. It wasn't live television. There were no headlines. Just late-night airwaves, and the kind of honesty that only comes in the dark. I used to believe healing was a staircase, he said. You climb. You rise. You get better. A pause. But it's not. It's a room you come back to, again and again. A room with light and silence and sometimes another person in it, holding tea. Elena leaned back, tears slipping quietly down the sides of her face. This doctor, he continued, she didn't try to fix me. She stayed long enough for me to begin fixing myself. The interviewer asked something technical, something about policy or hospital reform. Travis brought it back to humanity. To be honest, he said, what saved me was not a program. It was a moment. And what moment was that? The host asked. She laughed. He chuckled softly, the sound carried by the signal like a secret being let go. It was in a hallway, in a hospital, at the end of a long, ruined night. And she laughed, and I remembered what it felt like to want to be part of the world again. Elena closed her eyes. She could still feel the echo of that night in her chest, bare feet, silk dress, the weight of his shoulder under her fingertips. Well, the next morning, the wind had changed. Spring hadn't arrived, but it had hinted the air slightly less sharp, the birds impatient. She stepped into the hospital's community wing. Volunteers were setting up folding chairs for a seminar. Children's artwork covered the wall, crayon and pencil, messy and full of hope. Dr. Roy greeted her at the entrance with a cup of coffee and a slow smile. They want you back, he said. I'm not gone, she replied. He nodded, then handed her a folded sheet of paper. He asked me to give this to you if you came in today. She opened it. A sketch of the staff break room, the tiny table where she used to eat alone. But in the drawing, 2 chairs were filled. A small teapot sat between them. And at the top, we begin where we once paused. Later that afternoon, a nurse tapped her on the shoulder. Someone's waiting for you in the cafeteria, she whispered. Elena smiled. Let me guess. He says he's not wearing a tie this time. Elena nodded, smoothed her coat, and headed for the elevator, her breath even, her chest steady. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just ready. Chapter 9. Tea in the cafeteria. Elena stepped into the cafeteria just as the last of the lunch crowd filtered out, leaving behind the soft murmur of trays being cleared and chairs scraping gently against tile. There he was. Travis, at their old booth. No tuxedo. No camera crew. Just a dark navy sweater, sleeves pushed to his forearms, a teacup between his hands. He looked up the moment she entered, and smiled. Not the practiced smile of his press appearances, but the quiet one, the one he gave her only in moments when nothing needed to be said. She crossed the room slowly, each step steady, purposeful. When she sat down, he slid a cup across the table. Chamomile, he said. Same honey. Same silence. Elena took it, warmed her hands against the cup, then looked at him. This is where it started, she murmured. He nodded. And where I want something to begin. She raised an eyebrow. Something? Travis pulled something from his coat pocket. Not a ring box, just a folded square of sketch paper. She hesitated, then opened it. A drawing of this very table. 2 cups. 2 hands. One reaching. And in the center of the page, between the cups, will you begin again with me? Elena felt something in her chest break gently, the way frost melts off a windowsill at sunrise. Not dramatic. Just inevitable. I'm not the same, she said. I'm tired. I've changed. He leaned forward, eyes never leaving hers. I don't want the woman who used to laugh in the hallway. I want the one who learned how to survive without ever being rescued. Silence. Then, and I want to sit with her, as long as she'll let me. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached across the table, touched his, held it. No speech. No kiss. No grand gesture. Just warmth. 2 people who had fallen separately, now choosing to rise together. Way. Across the cafeteria, someone stood near the vending machine, watching them. Anurse. She didn't interrupt. She just smiled, and walked away. The cafeteria slowly emptied, the rhythm of the hospital resuming its quiet pulse. Elena and Travis remained. Not talking much. Not needing to. The kind of silence they shared now was no longer weighted with avoidance. It was the kind that came when 2 people had already said the most important things, not in words but in presence. He pulled out a pen and turned the drawing over. You never said yes, he murmured, smiling softly. She tilted her head. You didn't ask with a ring. I asked with what I have. He held up the sketch. 2 cups, one reaching hand, the words written in soft graphite. Will you begin again with me? Elena looked at the paper, then at him. Her voice was steady when it came. I already did. He blinked. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a folded paper napkin on the table. Written in her cursive were 6 simple words. Only if you stay this time. He leaned across the table, taking her hand again. I will, he said. Not as a patient, not as a story. As a man who knows what it means to lose everything and find something worth building again. She held his gaze. And what are we building? He sat back, eyes glinting. A wing. A clinic. A life. Elena laughed quiet and real. A life, she repeated. In this cafeteria? He looked around. The tea's not great, but the company's gotten better. She rolled her eyes and smiled. Then, for the first time in what felt like years, she leaned in and kissed him. No crescendo. No music cue. Just a kiss. Still and certain, like the last page of a letter written by hand. Okay. When they parted, Travis whispered, "You know I almost proposed in a helicopter?" She blinked. He shrugged. "Right before I disappeared, I had the ring. The speech. The skyline." She smiled. "What stopped you?" I realized none of it was real. "And this is?" He nodded, holding up the napkin and her 6 words. "This is." End quote. Later, as they walked the hospital corridors together, staff smiled quietly and stepped aside. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Travis stopped before the new art therapy room. The walls were painted now, warm golds and soft blues. Framed sketches lined the entrance. Children's chalk rainbows, penciled hands, crayon windows. He pointed to the last frame. Elena stepped forward. Her window. Her plant. A cup of tea and a woman seated beside it, her back to the world, the light pouring in around her. At the bottom, his initials, TK. She turned to him. "Yours?" "No," he said. "Ours." Chapter 10. Where the Drawings Live. 1 year later, the hospital had changed. Not in architecture, Mercy General still stood tall and a little weather-worn, its brick bones unchanged. But inside, something had shifted. There was color where there had been cold. Music, sometimes, and names. First names, patient names, written in charcoal script above art tables and therapy doors. The Evelyn King Community Recovery Wing was no longer new. It was lived in. On a warm April morning, Elena stepped into the wing's central hall, clipboard in one hand, cup of tea in the other. A child was sketching in the far corner tongue between his teeth in concentration, crayons scattered like confetti around his knees. She smiled. He looked up. "Dr. Myers, I drew you." He held up a page. Elena in a white coat, her stethoscope like a lasso, a small sun drawn above her head. "Am I glowing?" she asked, amused. "You're the helper," he said seriously. "Helpers glow." She crouched next to him. "What about him?" she asked, pointing to the man in the drawing beside her, taller, with a quiet face and a sketchbook in his hand. The boy squinted. "He's the one who teaches us how to see things, even the sad parts." Travis. Upstairs, the old psych unit had been renovated into rooms filled with light. The cafeteria had a bookshelf now, stacked with novels, sketch pads, puzzles. One wall displayed framed pieces donated by patients past and present. At the center, Travis's earliest sketch of the corridor, the one where he and Elena danced barefoot after the gala. Underneath, in delicate type, "Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It returns each time we're seen and not turned away." Every week, Travis hosted a workshop in the therapy lounge. He didn't call it art therapy, just drawing quietly. He never lectured. He offered paper. He shared his pencils. He told the group, "You don't have to explain anything today. Just draw it. Even the messy parts. Especially the messy parts." Some patients drew clouds. Some drew windows. One woman drew her heartbeat as a wave. Travis hung them all. Because every picture, he said, was a record that someone had stayed in there. That afternoon, Elena and Travis walked the courtyard path behind the hospital. Spring had coaxed flowers from the soil. Children passed by with clipboards and paint. They didn't speak much. They rarely needed to. "I made something," he said suddenly. She glanced at him. "A drawing?" He shook his head. "A space." She followed him to the far edge of the wing. A small alcove, a quiet reading room. Inside, 2 armchairs, a tea kettle, and a wall lined with blank frames. "For new stories," he said. "Ones that haven't been drawn yet." She stepped in, eyes taking in the stillness. It felt sacred. "Is this for patients?" she asked. "It's for anyone," he said. "Anyone who's ever fallen and still wants to be seen." He pulled something from the shelf behind him, a simple, spiral-bound book. She opened it. Inside, every drawing he'd ever given her. Window. Hands. The corridor. The kiss. Her laugh. Her silence. Their beginning. At the end, a blank page. And beneath it, Only one line. For what we build next. She looked at him and nodded. Evening settled gently across the city, soft gold melting into dusky blue. From the windows of Mercy General, the skyline shimmered, buildings glowing from within like lanterns. The hospital exhaled its quiet rhythm. Monitors beeping, slippers whispering across tile, the hush of life being mended in small, unseen ways. In the cafeteria, Elena poured 2 cups of tea chamomile for her, Earl Grey for him. No sugar this time. They had stopped dressing up their comforts. She found him in the art wing, alone, standing before a new installation wall where blank frames waited like open arms. "I thought we might add one more," she said, holding out a manila envelope. He took it. Inside, a sketch she'd drawn. Crude, pencil smudged, but unmistakably hers. It was the view from his old hospital room, room 309. The window, the skyline beyond, and inside it, 2 people seated side by side, shoulders touching. One was sketching. The other was simply staying. "I finally learned to draw you back," she said softly. He held the page as if it were glass. "It's perfect." "No," she smiled. "It's honest." He mounted it beside the others. And for a moment, they stood together, silent again, but now full of words unspoken because they were understood. A week later, they held a small gathering in the hospital's reading room. Just a few patients, a couple of nurses, and Dr. Roy, who brought pastries and refused to call it a ceremony. They didn't make speeches. They sat in chairs. They passed around sketchbooks. One woman read a poem. A teenage boy sang a verse of a half-finished song. And in the middle of it all, Travis stood and took Elena's hand. "I don't have a ring," he said, quiet and certain. She raised an eyebrow. "You gave me a hospital wing. I think we're square." Laughter rippled. Then, gently, he pulled a folded drawing from his back pocket. She opened it. It was the cafeteria. Their table. Their 2 teacups. But this time, something new had been added. A small hand-drawn sign taped to the table's edge. "Reserved. For as long as we're still choosing." She looked at him. He looked back. And she whispered, "Yes." Not just to him. To everything. To the falling. The staying. The beginning again. Brookery. Later, in the quiet of their apartment, one filled with warm light, shared books, and the constant rustle of pencil on paper, Elena taped a new drawing to the wall beside their bed. It was simple. A Hospital Corredor. Lit from the end. 2 silhouettes walking, side by side. Unlabeled. No need. Because now the drawings lived here, and so did they. Together,